Welcome back to the Explainer. Have you ever opened up a file, looked at a massive, scrolling wall of tangled programming code, and just felt an immediate headache coming on? Yeah, we've all been there. You are definitely not alone. But today, we're going to completely cure that headache. We are going to figure out exactly how to take those long, confusing scripts and transform them into beautifully organized, hyper-efficient systems. If you want your programs to not just work, but to actually be a joy to read and update, well, you're in exactly the right place.
Okay, let's quickly breeze through our agenda for mastering this topic. We'll start with functions as reusable code blocks, move into breaking programs into parts, tackle scope, that's local versus global, then building better functions, and finally going from messy to modular. I want you to anchor our entire discussion today on this one core idea. Good programming isn't just about aggressively forcing the computer to do what you want. It's an art form, really. It's all about readability and reusability. Because if you build your program from smaller, really purposeful pieces, you save yourself, and honestly, anyone else who has to read your code, hours of total frustration. That's essentially our big problem and solution theme for today. All right, let's dive right into section 1. Functions are reusable code blocks. So, here is your immediate, absolute lifesaver for repetitive code. The function. A function is basically just a named block of code that groups specific instructions together. Imagine you have a task you need to execute, say, 20 times in a program. Without a function, you're literally copying and pasting that exact same code 20 times. And if you find a bug, you have to hunt it down and fix it in 20 different places. It's a nightmare. But if you wrap it up inside a function, you write it once, you name it, and then you just call out that name whenever you need it. And what's really cool is that whether you're coding in Python or Java, the core concept remains exactly the same. Notice how the function is called greet, but it takes an input inside those parentheses. We call those inputs parameters. So by passing in a parameter like Mina or Omar, that exact same block of code instantly adapts to totally different situations. It makes your code incredibly flexible and widely reusable. Moving right along to section 2, breaking programs into parts. This brings us to a massive concept called modularization. Think of it this way. If functions are your individual bricks, modularization is your architectural blueprint. It is the ultimate organizational system. It's where we take a massive program and actively divide it into smaller, manageable sections, or modules. Every single module contains related functions and has one very clear, defined purpose. Honestly, this is exactly how professional software engineers manage highly complex, massive-scale software without entirely losing their minds. Modularization is, well, it's exactly like splitting up roles in a huge school group project. We all know that if one person tries to do everything, it's a complete disaster. But if you assign one student to research, boom, that's your input module. Another handles the writing, there's your validation module. Someone else does the editing, your processing module. And the final person handles presenting, the output module. Everyone gets to work independently, and you just bring it all together smoothly at the end. Errors are way easier to spot, and multiple programmers can literally work at the exact same time. Let's map out what these benefits actually look like in the real world. Say you're building a school app. Having totally separate modules for logging in and generating reports means different teams can build and test at the exact same time. That gives you incredible speed. Or in a video game, if you decide you want to change how collisions work, you only tweak the detect collision module. You don't accidentally break the player's movement in the process. That's maintainability. And in an online shop, a search items module can be reused on the home page, the category page, and the checkout page. That's reuse. If you're prepping for IB exams, cement this golden rule in your brain. Modularization creates code that is well-structured, reusable, and maintainable. Okay, on to section 3. Let's talk about scope. Local versus global. We called this overarching concept scope. And scope is, quite simply, the boundary line of where your data lives. When you create a variable to hold some information, it doesn't automatically just get broadcast to the entire universe of your software. No. Its scope dictates exactly which specific parts of your program are actually allowed to see, access, and change that piece of data. So the absolutely crucial thing here is understanding the difference between global and local. A global variable is declared outside of all your functions. Think of it kind of like the name of your school. Everyone, in every single classroom, knows the school's name. It can be read anywhere. A local variable, on the other hand, is declared inside a specific function. That's more like a specific student's test score in one particular classroom. That score only exists and only matters while that specific class or function is running. Now listen, here is a massive trap to avoid on your exams. A local variable cannot normally be used outside its function. If you try to print that specific student's test score in a completely different module, your program is going to crash. It literally has no idea what you're talking about. Furthermore, while global variables might seem way easier at first glance, since everything can see them, you actually need to use them very, very carefully. If every single function is allowed to change a global variable, tracking down bugs becomes incredibly confusing. All right, moving into section 4, building better functions. Whenever you sit down to actually write a function, you've got to walk yourself through these 4 logical steps. First up, purpose. Ask yourself, what single, highly specific task is this doing? A good function should absolutely never multitask. Second, inputs. What exact values or parameters need to be provided for it to do its job? Third, processing. What are the step-by-step instructions that will transform those inputs? And lastly, output. Is this function just going to display a result on the screen, or is it going to return a calculated value back to the main program so we can use it later? Let's look at a really practical example of this in action. We've got a function here cleverly named area_rectangle. Notice that meaningful name? You know exactly what this thing does just by glancing at it. Its inputs are length and width. The processing is just a simple multiplication, but the really important part is the output. It uses the return command. It doesn't just lazily print the area to the screen, it mathematically returns that value. That means the main program could take that value and say, add the areas of 5 completely different rectangles together later on. And finally, section 5, the big one, from messy to modular. I want you to picture a monolithic script, classic spaghetti code. It's asking for a student's name, taking 2 test marks, calculating the average, and then figuring out if they passed or failed, all in one single, rigid, continuous block. Now imagine if this wasn't 10 lines of code, but 1,000 lines long. If there's a calculation error somewhere in there, you have to dig through the inputs and the grading logic just to find the math problem. It's a massive, massive headache. Now, instantly contrast that mess with this beautiful after version. We've elegantly split that one giant task into 3 purposeful, bite-sized pieces. We have an input_marks function that only worries about getting the data. We have a calc average function whose only job in the entire universe is math. And we have a grade result function that purely handles the pass or fail logic. So why does this second version win hands down? Well, first, each function is hyper-focused on one clear job, totally satisfying our rule for building better functions. Second, testing becomes an absolute breeze. If the average is suddenly coming out wrong, you know exactly which small block of code to investigate. You don't even have to glance at the grading logic. And finally, if you decide to build a completely different app next year that also happens to require calculating an average, you can literally just lift that calc_average function out and reuse it perfectly. Let's test your understanding with a quick little mental activity. Imagine you're building a modular program for a busy cafe order system. Think about how you would structure the whole thing. You'd probably want a global variable called tax rate, right? Because that tax applies to absolutely every single order in the store. But then you'd want really specific local functions, an item total to multiply the price by the quantity, an add tax function to apply your global rate to that specific order, and a display bill function to just print the final receipt. But wait, here's a fun curveball to keep your problem-solving brains engaged. If you added a completely new module for a customer discount, should that function run before or after the add tax function? Think about it for a second. The exact order in which you call your beautifully modularized functions drastically changes the final mathematical output. Modularity gives you the power to easily swap the order of these steps around without having to rewrite your whole entire program. So, I want to leave you with this final, somewhat provocative question to ponder. Based on everything we've covered today, from breaking big tasks down into reusable functions, to separating out global and local scope, to making our testing incredibly easy, in what type of real-world software project would modularization be the absolute difference between incredible success and total catastrophic failure? Just think about the massive systems you interact with every day, from streaming services to banking apps. Without the sheer power of functions and modularization, literally none of them could exist. Keep analyzing the digital structures all around you, and I'll catch you on the next explainer.